Phil's car sputtered to a stop in front of the abandoned building, his unease growing every looming as the minutes ticked by. He had made a couple of stops on the way, speaking to old friends about Freddy's, and everyone had pretty much said the same thing. It seemed like Freddy's had a reputation for its creepiness, and he could definitely see that now that he was here. The building was run down and dilapidated, with gnarled trees that looked like overgrown hands stretching out from the ground. There was trash littered all across the ground, and all of the windows were covered with dirt and soot, obscuring whatever was inside. There was a sign above the restaurant's dusty blue doors with cartoonish mascots now broken with time, and the words, Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria, were barely legible. The whole building looked like it would fall down at any moment, and he took that in mind as he pushed over the front doors, its hinges howling as they pushed back against Phil. Wow, this place really took a beating, didn't it? Phil said to himself as he looked around the interior, or what remained of it. The inside was no better than the outside, with colourful paper plates scattered across barely stable tables. The walls were covered with what looked like mould, and the floor were cracked and almost completely battered in some places, like someone took a sledgehammer and went to town. There was tassels hanging from the ceiling with pictures of the mascots tied to the ends of them, the faces now warped and distorted with time. He looked over to his left, seeing a room filled with robotic parts he couldn't name, let alone recognize in any fashion. Finally, he looked up toward the stage, where his eyes landed on the robotic mascots. They sat there silently staring ahead, like they were waiting on a performance that would never come, and he wouldn't even have known they were there if he hadn't looked up. There were 3 on the stage, with a 4th one on a little stage besides there, and all of them looked like they've been through hell and back. The bear was the first he looked over, its matted brown fur stained with old pizza stains and dust. His teeth were broken and chipped in some places, and the top part of his hat leaned to the side, barely holding by a thread. His microphone was oddly intact, with the only thing out of place being a blackish-red stain at the bottom of it. The bunny was to the right of the bear, with its oversized red guitar barely fitting on the small stage. Some of its strings were cut or straight missing, and it hung loosely in the rabbit's hands, like he was ready to drop it at any moment. Its red bow tie was ripped on one side, revealing what looked like metal caging underneath, and one side of its jaw hung loosely to the left. Next was the chicken, which looked the creepiest to Phil, with its eyes almost bulging from her head, like she was 1 second away from pouncing off the stage at him. Her bib was ripped and torn, and "Let's eat" was written on the front of it in bright, yellow letters. Her feet were tipped with sharp silver talons, something that would surely be dangerous to children, and she held a cupcake in her hand. The cupcake was even more disturbing than the chicken, with one of its eyes barely in the socket, slouching and blowing slightly in the breeze. Lastly was the fox, who was the most broken out of the bunch, with giant holes and rips across his entire body. A broken eye patch laid over his right eye, and the other almost seemed to be looking at him, sending a shiver down his spine. A massive hook laid embedded in the curtain of the stage, leaving a massive gash through its purple fabric. It's hard to imagine these guys used to entertain kids. I guess they looked better in their heyday, Phil thought to himself as he walked down the musty hall, stopping in front of a back room. The sense of unease crept back into his mind as he opened the door, a blast of dusty air almost punching him in the face. The room was largely empty, with only 2 broken arcade games and a dirty stain on the ground, but he knew what it entailed. This is where the kids disappeared, and this is where his investigation would begin. He backed up and surveyed the room, scribbling down notes in his notepad before he felt a hand clasp around his shoulder. He jumped and whirled around, reaching for his taser in the process, before his eyes landed on a middle-aged man, his smile almost unsettling when taking into account the environment that we're in. He analyzed the man before testing his hand on his taser, the uneasy feeling being stronger than ever. He got an odd feeling about this man, and he wasn't going to take any chances that he would regret.